For our next example that I'm going to do is how to model form, the basics of modeling form with watercolor. So this is important for our geometric forms exercises. This is what you will be doing with one color. And we'll take our blue, go with our cobalt blue again. And this is similar to what I was just showing you in negative painting in terms of layering. Over here we have a hard-edged geometric form, a block, and the hard edges are pretty straightforward and easy to do. We want to think about our light coming in at the top, so the lightest area is going to be this top plane, and the darkest area will be over here in the shadow area. So let's say it's a middle value object, not a white object. So we're going to lay some light value over the whole thing. So even on our cast shadow, everything has the same level of paint on it right now. The same value. Now you could paint each area separately and let it dry, or you can do it in terms of layers, and the layers is a little bit more efficient, a little faster. So what I'm going to do is let this dry, or dry it with the hairdryer. Alright, so this is dry now, and I'm going to do the same thing but leaving the light area light and just putting layers on the rest of it. And I can come back in and add a little bit darker area right in here, right in the corners, where some of the core shadows would be on a block, and then a little bit down in here. And the other side, underside. And then I would let that dry. Smooth this out right in here. Go let this dry. Alright, so then I'm going to come back into it with a little bit darker value here. And play up the shadows. Because the surface is dry, I've got harder edges over here now. So you can see how we have our light, our middle, and our dark side on the block. But how do we really make that light area stand out? We don't want to make it darker. What we're going to do is do a little bit of the negative painting around it. This side's dry, this side's a little bit wet. So let's say that it's sitting on a table, and I'm going to put some background tone in it. And as in negative painting, I'm painting the negative area, not the positive area. So the light value will stand out now because I've painted the negative space. And it's still cobalt blue, and I added a little bit of black in there for the background there. So you can see, now we have our block sitting on a table, and even though this is painted, it's painted very lightly, it's not as white as the table surface, but because of the contrast with the negative space, it really pops out as a light value now. All right, so for our next form that we're going to do a sphere. And this one's a little bit more complex because it's a rounded form. So we have a hard edge on the outside, but we have soft edges on the inside. This is going to require some use of wet into wet techniques. But you can see I've blocked it out, I've drawn it out with a watercolor pencil. And I have the break between light and shadow here. So this area is the light side, and this is the shadow side, and then we have our cast shadow down here. And we have our back light coming from above there. So I'm going to start off in similar ways, but I'm going to be putting water into this area here. Very light wash and spreading the water around. And even into the cast shadow down here. Now we would let that absorb just a little bit. Right here at the break between light and shadow, that's where our strongest shadow on the form is, and that's what we call the core shadow. So I want to remember where that is. I'm laying this in, notice, with the side of my round brush. And the reason for doing it wet into wet is because I want a soft edge moving into the lighter areas, because it's a rounded form, and because it's a rounded form, it has softer transitions in tone. So you can see how this is all one big wet area right now, and I'm going to add just a little bit more color in here. I like to drop color in by patting the color around and then letting letting the water do some work. Maybe I'll use the brush to move it around. And I'm going to add some down here at the base, what we call it, the sit core, or the shadow, the base of the object. And let the cast shadow get a little bit lighter as it moves out. I can try and soften the edges of the shadow too by just adding some water on the outside. But the danger of that is that you might run into a back run effect there. So you can see the little softer area. See, I'm letting the water do some work for me. So I dropped pigment in there, and now I'm letting the water pull the pigment around. You can see the very soft transitional effect here, and we have soft tones moving in there. I might add just a little bit lighter tone there. And then I would let this dry. So I'm going to take it to the hairdryer and dry it. Okay, and here we are back. We're back from our drying it with our hairdryer. And a nice soft edge here, but I might want something to be a little bit darker, so especially in the cast shadow. So I'm going to layer on and add a little bit darker tone in here. One thing you'll notice with watercolor, because it's a transparent media, it dries lighter than it looks when it's wet. So however dark you think it is when you're working close up and it's wet, be prepared for it to look lighter when it's dry. So I'm going to add a little bit more color in here. This is on the dry surface, but I'm going to take my water and I'm going to soften the edge. And this goes back to that graded wash technique, when you use the water to soften the edge and pull the tone. So if you get too much water, you're going to create something called a back run effect. So just drop some more pigment into it. And if I don't have enough pigment in my brush, then I will pick up the under layers. So I'm going to smooth it out this way. And then take my big brush and smooth that tone, and then I'm going to add some more water on this edge, on this end. And a little bit of water down here to smooth out that. So now what I'm trying to do is to get a darker area right in here for the core shadow, a lighter area in here for the reflected light. Well, I did tell you that you could lift it, so I will show you how to lift the reflected light. This is another way of doing it. And so I'm going to take my brush, no color in the brush, and lift up to get a little bit of reflected light in there. So remember, it makes a soft edge. And over here, I'm trying for a soft edge. So I have my darkest area in there. Going back here, making my cast shadow a little bit darker. And then, like I did before up there, I'm going to take a background, putting a background so I can see this form. Remember that you want to make sure things dry, because if you put wet areas next to each other, they will charge into one another. And you can see by laying in the negative space that you can see the light area of on the top of the sphere. And here we have now one thing you can do with watercolor is to let gravity do some work for you. So I'm going to hold that up and let that run down, create an interesting effect in the background. See, the background right now is wet into wet compared to the hard edge of the sphere. The paint goes where the water goes, but there's no water in the top of that sphere. So I'm going to move it around like this. And then pull it back out like that. So this is dry, so the paint didn't come down here. Pull it in there a little bit. And then just increase a little bit more dark right at the base of the sphere too. And that's how we model a sphere. So all of the forms that you're going to be working with can be related back to these basic geometric forms. Even a cylinder is like a sphere, a cone is like a sphere in terms of the rounded forms, and blocks and rectangles and triangles are very much like this. And all of your hard shapes or hard forms, subject matter that you look at, try to relate it back to these basic forms that you're practicing with right now.